On the morning of June 18, 1815, mud came up over the ankles of tens of thousands of soldiers standing on a stretch of Belgian farmland. Ordinary mud. The kind you'd scrape off your boot without thinking. And that mud, heavy, wet, clinging, was about to decide the fate of the entire world. Because standing somewhere on that field was the most feared military genius in human history, a man who had conquered most of a continent with nothing but speed and audacity. Napoleon Bonaparte needed the ground to dry before he could attack. So he waited. He stared at the sky. He waited for the sun. And in the few hours he lost to that mud, the one thing he could not afford to arrive at that battlefield, arrived anyway. By the end of that day, he would lose everything. His army. His empire. His second chance at greatness. His freedom. Waterloo. The word itself became a synonym for total, apocalyptic defeat, the kind of loss so complete that it erased a man from history. That's the story everyone knows. The tyrant is beaten. Europe is saved. Order is restored. Democracy wins. The end. But here's what nobody tells you. Napoleon didn't lose because he was outmatched. He very nearly won. Several times that single afternoon, victory was within his grasp. A different order given. A different hour chosen. A bridge held. A message delivered on time. And the man who had conquered half of Europe would have walked off that field alive and victorious. And if he had, the world you are living in right now would be completely unrecognizable. So let's do something dangerous. Let's change just one thing about that afternoon. Let's follow it forward, through the decades, across the oceans, all the way to today, and watch what happens. Because the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. And the ending is going to make you question everything you think you know about the timeline you're actually living in. But first, you need to understand why Napoleon was even standing on that battlefield, because it's one of the most astonishing comebacks in human history. Just months earlier, he was finished. Done. Exiled to Elba, a tiny speck of an island in the Mediterranean, stripped of everything, his crown, his armies, his empire. Guarded. Forgotten. The kings of Europe finally breathed out. The nightmare was over. They thought. Then, in the spring of 1815, Napoleon escaped. He landed on the coast of France with barely 1,000 men. Just 1,000. And he started marching north toward Paris. The king panicked and sent soldiers, thousands of them, to stop him. To arrest him. To kill him if they had to. And when those soldiers met Napoleon on the road, he did something extraordinary. He stepped out in front of them. Alone. He opened his coat. He looked at those guns and he dared them to fire on their emperor. Not a single shot was fired. Instead, they joined him. One regiment. Then another. Then another. They raised the largest coalition the world had ever seen. Russia. Austria. Britain. Prussia. All united by one fear, and Napoleon would break them one by one. Napoleon knew the arithmetic was impossible if they united. So he decided to strike first. Strike fast. Break the pieces before they came together. Which brings us back to that mud. And the single most important fact, Napoleon was not facing one army at Waterloo. He was facing two. To the west, the British and their Dutch and Belgian allies under Wellington, brilliant, cautious, nearly impossible to break. To the east, marching hard across the countryside, 70,000 fresh Prussian soldiers under Marshal Blücher. Veterans who could turn the entire battle on its head. Napoleon's entire plan was brutally, elegantly simple. Keep those two armies apart. Destroy Wellington in the morning. Defeat him before Prussians arrived in the afternoon. It should have worked. And here is where we make our change. It's a small one. Almost absurdly small. But small changes reshape the entire world. In actual history, Napoleon sent a third of his entire army, tens of thousands of men, under Marshal Grouchy, to chase the retreating Prussians and keep them from Waterloo. It was the right idea. Grouchy was supposed to be a hammer blow falling on Blücher's flank. But Grouchy was cautious, methodical, fatally literal about his orders. When his own officers could hear cannon fire from the main battle in the distance, the sound of the emperor fighting for his life, they begged Grouchy to turn around. March toward the guns. Forget the Prussians for a moment. Help the emperor. And Grouchy refused. His orders said to follow the Prussians. So he followed the Prussians. In the wrong direction. While the battle that would decide the fate of Europe raged on without the men he commanded. So here's our change. Just one thing. Different from history in the smallest possible way. Let Grouchy hear those guns and listen to his officers. Let him march toward the sound of the battle. Or better yet, let Napoleon never split his force in the first place. Let him keep those tens of thousands of men on the main field, ready and waiting. Now the arithmetic of the entire battle inverts. The Prussians, when they finally arrive that afternoon, don't crash into an exhausted French flank. They run headlong into fresh French reserves who are ready and waiting. The decisive hammer blow that broke Napoleon in our timeline simply never lands. And Wellington's line, which held on by its fingernails, now breaks. The British army retreats toward the coast. And on the evening of June 18, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte stands victorious on that muddy field. Against all the odds, he has won. So, what happens next? This is where it gets fascinating. And I need you to stay with me, because the first thing that happens is not what you'd expect. The first thing that happens is nothing. Nothing changes. Not immediately. Because winning one battle, even a battle this legendary, does not win a war. Napoleon has beaten one coalition army. But out there, still marching, still gathering, are the Russians and the Austrians. Hundreds of thousands of men, closing in from the east. A simpler story would have Napoleon marching through Europe, conquering capitals by tea time, restored to glory. But the truth is more interesting. Waterloo doesn't hand him the world. It hands him something more valuable: time. And leverage. And hope. It shatters the myth that he can be easily beaten. It makes the other powers hesitate. And a hesitating enemy is an enemy you can negotiate with. So picture it. A victorious Napoleon, back in Paris, stronger than he's been in years. But he's not strong enough to fight all of Europe forever, and he's clever enough to know it. This is the crucial turn. In our real history, Napoleon remained a conqueror to the very end. But a Napoleon who wins at Waterloo has been to the abyss. He's been exiled. He's been forgotten. He's climbed back from the grave once already. And here's the twist in his character that changes everything: this Napoleon might choose to stop. Not out of mercy. Out of strategy. He offers exhausted, war-weary Europe a deal. Peace, in exchange for his throne and France's natural borders. Let him rule France. Let him modernize it. Build it. And he'll stop. No more conquest. No more wars of aggression. Just rule. A stable Europe with Napoleon in it. Permanently. And Europe, staring down the cost of another decade of war against a man who simply refuses to lose, staring down the bills and the body counts and the shattered cities, might just take it. Now you have something that never existed in our timeline. A Europe with Napoleon in it. A continent reshaped not by the old kings, but by the most radical reformer of the age. And that's where the real change begins. Because to understand what a surviving Napoleon does to the world, you have to understand what Napoleon actually was. And it's the opposite of what most people think. We remember him as a warlord. A tyrant. The little dictator with his hand in his coat. But ask a lawyer in France today what Napoleon left behind, and they'll point to something you've probably never heard of: the Napoleonic Code. It was a complete rewriting of the law, clear, rational, written down so ordinary people could actually understand it instead of having to hire a nobleman to translate 1,000 years of tangled feudal nonsense. It swept away centuries of aristocratic privilege. It declared that all men were equal before the law. It said that careers should be open to talent instead of birth. If your father was a peasant, you weren't doomed to be one too. You could be a general, a judge, a minister, if you were smart enough, ambitious enough, talented enough. In our timeline, Napoleon fell. He was crushed and exiled, and his empire was erased from the map. But the code survived. It escaped. And it went on to become the foundation of the legal systems of dozens of countries, from Europe to South America to the Middle East. What does that man build if he doesn't lose? If he rules for another 20, 30 years, exporting his code, his schools, his meritocracy across an entire continent? Stay with that thought. We're coming back to it. But first, let's follow the ripples outward across the ocean, because a surviving Napoleon changes the entire planet. 12 years before Waterloo, Napoleon sold an enormous chunk of North America to the young United States. The Louisiana Purchase. At a stroke, it doubled America's size. Why did he sell it? He needed cash. He'd lost a brutal campaign in the Caribbean. Europe was his obsession. The New World was a distraction. But imagine a Napoleon who is winning in Europe. Secure. With time and money and ambition to spare. Does he still sell half a continent? A triumphant French empire holds on to its foothold in the Americas and expands it. The United States gets boxed in on the Atlantic coast. French becomes the language of the Mississippi Valley. The great story of the 1800s isn't the westward expanding American superpower. It's a French empire straddling two continents. Masters of Europe and lords of the Americas. That single decision, not to sell, knocks over dominoes that run straight into the 20th century. No continental American superpower means no America as we know it. When the Great Wars come, when Europe tears itself apart in the 20th century, there is no cavalry riding in from across the Atlantic. No American money. No American soldiers. The whole architecture of the modern world, built on American power and democracy as a counterweight to European tyranny, simply never gets constructed. Someone else builds it. That someone speaks French. And they build it very, very differently. You might be feeling something warm. A Europe of law and reason and merit. A world where birth doesn't decide your worth. Where talent matters. Where the law applies to everyone equally. It sounds, honestly, like it might be better than the messy, violent, chaotic world we actually got. So let me stop you right there. Here's the thing about Napoleon that everyone forgets. For all his brilliant reforms, for all his enlightened ideas about law and education and meritocracy, Napoleon was not a democrat. He crowned himself emperor. He built a police state with spies and censors in every city. He controlled the newspapers. He silenced critics. He rewrote the entire idea of who held power so that every drop of it flowed upward, toward one man. Him. Yes, he gave people equality before the law. But he gave them no vote. No free press. No right to say no. No right to question his judgment. His was a world where you could rise as high as your talents could carry you, as long as you never, ever questioned the emperor at the top. Now let that empire survive. Let it spread across a continent. Let it expand to 2 continents. Let this brilliant, rational, utterly unfree system take root and grow stronger for 30 years with no rival democracy to point to. No messy American alternative to show people what freedom could look like, no competing ideologies pushing back against it. One code. One emperor. One efficient, orderly, watchful state, stretching further than Rome ever dreamed. The most enlightened dictatorship the world has ever seen. A golden cage with the bars polished so bright you can see your reflection in them. Ask yourself honestly, is that freedom? Or is it something more dangerous? It's a world so well-ordered, so rational, so clearly run for the good of the people, that humanity might have walked into it and pulled the door shut behind them, smiling, and never realized they were locked in. And here comes the final turn. The one this entire story has been walking toward. We've been treating Waterloo as a tragedy narrowly avoided. The day the tyrant fell and freedom won. But maybe we've had it backwards this entire time. Maybe Napoleon losing at Waterloo wasn't the world being saved from a monster. Maybe it was the world being saved from a cage so comfortable, so reasonable, so well run, that we might have stopped noticing it was a cage at all. His defeat cracked Europe back open. It kept the continent divided, competing, arguing, free to become the messy, chaotic, democratic thing it eventually became. The rain fell. The mud held. Grouchy marched the wrong way. And in doing so, a slow, cautious, forgettable marshal named Grouchy accidentally saved something, not through brilliance, but through hesitation. Through following orders. Through being too literal, too careful, too afraid to disobey. He may have accidentally saved the free world. So here's my question for you. I genuinely want to read your answer in the comments below. If you could go back to that rain-soaked morning, if you had the power to dry the mud with a wave of your hand, or turn Grouchy around, or give Napoleon the victory he needed, knowing everything you now know about the world it would build, a world of law and merit and reason, but also surveillance and control and no free choice about who leads you, would you do it? Would you trade the messy freedom we ended up with for the beautiful, orderly cage we escaped? Think carefully before you answer. Because here's the thought I want to leave you with tonight. Every empire that ever locked a people into a cage told them the same thing: it's for your own good. It's more rational, more orderly, more fair, more efficient. Napoleon would have told them that too.